In 1985, the cities of Los Angeles and San Francisco were in a panic. There was a terrifying serial killer on the loose, and nobody seemed to know how to stop him. Nicknamed the Walk-In Killer, the Valley Intruder, and then, most infamously, the Night Stalker, Richard Ramirez horrified the cities with his brutal crimes that involved over 15 victims. The crimes of the Night Stalker are a dark stain on the history of California, and these crimes, along with more information about the killer himself, are the focus of today's video. In this video, we'll be finding out more about the grisly nature of the Night Stalker killings, examining the dark personal history that helped form the mind of such a twisted killer, and finally, learning about the heroic efforts of those who helped capture the Night Stalker and lock him away for good. Please be warned, this video does contain discussion of some disturbing subjects. Richard Ramirez took the life of his first victim on the 10th of April 1984. 9-year-old Mei Leung, trying to find some money that she dropped, was coaxed into a basement by Ramirez, who told her he knew where the money was. What happened then to Leung, being physically and sexually assaulted and then stabbed to death with a switchblade, was truly the stuff of nightmares. Leung's murder was not initially connected to Ramirez, however. DNA evidence only revealed the truth in 2009. The first murder that Ramirez was officially tied to was the senseless murder of Jenny Vincow, a 79-year-old woman who lived in an apartment in Los Angeles' Glassell Park. This murder took place on the 28th of June 1984. Jenny was sleeping when Ramirez had crept in through a window, then stabbed her body and slashed her throat. This was the first known murder of Ramirez to follow what would become his typical pattern: breaking into a home, murdering the occupants, and usually robbing them as well. He would also often leave satanic symbols at the crime scenes, and sometimes even stop to raid the fridge to satisfy the physical hunger that went alongside his hunger for blood. After the murder of poor Jenny Vincow, Ramirez went on to take the lives of at least another 12 victims, targeting both men and women, young and old. During this time, there was an absolute media frenzy surrounding the mysterious identity of the serial killer. Ramirez was given different names by the press, such as the Walk-In Killer and the Valley Intruder, but the name that stuck was the Night Stalker. Fitting not only because of how frightening the name sounds, but because of how accurately it described the killer's crimes, as he would attack at night. During the time of his murder spree, Ramirez was a resident of the infamous Cecil Hotel in Los Angeles. The Cecil Hotel is known for its dark history of crime and suicide. It's also well known now for being the place where college student Elisa Lam was found dead inside the hotel's water tank. Ramirez stayed on the 14th floor of the hotel, paying only $14 a night for the privilege. It was alleged he would return to the hotel after committing a murder completely covered in blood, but nobody thought anything of it because the general behavior at the Cecil Hotel was already so wild that this wasn't even the strangest thing the hotel staff saw. If you're interested in finding out more about the Cecil Hotel or about the mysterious death of Elisa Lam, check out our other 2 videos on these topics. And if you like what you've seen of this video so far, consider subscribing to the channel for more interesting videos like this one. Thankfully, not all of the Night Stalker's murder victims were actually killed. Some of them survived their injuries, such as 16-year-old Whitney Bennett, who was hit in the head with a tire iron and then strangled with a telephone cord. However, when sparks began flying from the cord and Bennett began to breathe again, Ramirez thought that Jesus had saved the girl, so he ran away without murdering her. Another victim, 63-year-old Sophie Dickman, was held at gunpoint and was handcuffed, robbed, and assaulted. Ramirez told her to swear on Satan that he found all of the valuable items in her house, and when she did, he left without killing her. When Ramirez attacked a young couple engaged to be married, again their house was robbed, and they were made to swear on Satan that all the valuables had really been taken. This time, however, Ramirez told Inez Erickson, one of the victims, to tell the police that the Night Stalker was here. This just went to prove how invincible the Night Stalker thought he was, and also that he'd been following the media coverage about himself with great interest. Murder was not the only crime the Night Stalker committed. As mentioned already, he would frequently rob the houses he broke into. Chillingly, he also had a history of abducting and assaulting young children. After being taken by Ramirez and assaulted, the children would then be abandoned. Mercifully, they were not killed. In fact, one of the children who were abducted, Anastasia Hronas, actually helped to identify Ramirez to prosecutors. She was only 6 years old at the time. So at this point, by now you hopefully have a clear idea why the Night Stalker is someone who is hated by so many. You know about his crimes and about the suffering he inflicted on so many innocent people. But why did he act this way? Well, Richard Ramirez began to walk the path that would lead him to become a serial killer at a very young age. Ramirez did not have a pleasant childhood by any account. The problems began before he was even born, as his mother, Mercedes, worked in a boot factory and was allegedly exposed to toxic chemicals that had a negative impact on all of her children. As a child, Ramirez suffered several traumatic head injuries, a notable one when he was a toddler and a dresser fell on his head. Another head injury occurred when he fell off a swing when he was 5 and was knocked unconscious, and then began suffering from seizures. Ramirez was routinely abused by his alcoholic father, and he would escape the trauma at home by sneaking away to sleep in the local cemetery. He was heavily influenced by Miguel Ramirez, known as Mike, his cousin who served in the Vietnam War, who also committed many atrocities during his service. Mike Ramirez showed young Richard many photos he had taken of his crimes in Vietnam, which showed severed heads and bodies of his victims, women who he'd raped and brutally murdered. Richard was not appalled by what Mike had done. Instead, he found it fascinating. Along with telling his younger cousin horrifying tales about what he did to Vietnamese women, Mike Ramirez also taught Richard how to perform a stealth kill. Then when Mike shot his wife in the face, killing her, it was Richard who witnessed the crime. Surprisingly, he only received a 4-year stay in a mental institution for the crime. Afterwards, witnessing his cousin murder his wife, Ramirez moved in with his older sister, Ruth, and her husband. It was during this time he showed interest in Satanism, something that would later continue to influence his life and his crimes, and began using drugs such as LSD. He would also spy on women through their windows at night, something that his brother-in-law and his cousin Mike, once he was released from the mental institution, would join him in. This was only the beginning of Ramirez's crimes. He'd been a thief from a young age and spent a brief time in prison after being caught stealing a car. As a teenager, while working at a Holiday Inn, Ramirez sexually assaulted 2 children. He also tried to rape a woman in her hotel room, but he wasn't prosecuted for either crime. After being fired for the attempted rape, Ramirez moved from his home state of Texas to California, and that was where the murders began. In an article for AETV, criminologist Dr. Scott Bond says that Richard Ramirez was a sociopath and therefore prone to emotional outbursts, and was very spontaneous and volatile. A sociopath is also developed through life experiences and manufactured in society. Part of what led Ramirez down the path of a killer was the influence of his cousin Mike, along with many traumatic head injuries. Therefore, it's likely that Ramirez wasn't born a killer, he was made one. What is most frightening about this is the entire time he was committing murders, he knew what he was doing was wrong. In the words of Dr. Scott Bond, he simply didn't care, and he had an appetite for killing. Thankfully, Richard Ramirez's reign of terror as the Night Stalker only lasted a short time. He was eventually identified and apprehended thanks to the tireless work of police detectives Gil Carrillo and Frank Salerno, along with others in their team. The hunt for Ramirez was extensive and required a lot of expert detective work. One of the things that nearly got Ramirez caught was the type of shoes he wore. Initially, detectives discovered that whoever was doing the killings wore Avia sneakers, which were not a common brand of shoe at the time. The police were able to discover only one person in the Los Angeles area purchased sneakers the same make and size as the one that made the shoe print they'd twice discovered at crime scenes. They also were able to work out what type of gun the killer was using as well. Unfortunately, the mayor of San Francisco at the time, Dianne Feinstein, revealed this crucial information during a press conference. Ramirez followed the media reports about himself very closely, so when he found out the police knew what type of shoes he wore and what type of gun he was using, he quickly got rid of both pieces of evidence. It didn't matter though, because the web was really starting to close in on him now. Ramirez attempted to break into another house. However, a teenage boy was awake in the home and saw Ramirez driving away in what was actually a stolen car. He was able to report the type of car and some of the license plate to the police. Investigators eventually found the car and lifted a fingerprint from it, which identified the Night Stalker as the one who stole it. This, along with a footprint they got from the house and the description given by one of the Night Stalker's surviving victims, Inez Erickson, meant that investigators finally knew who was behind all of these brutal crimes. In a police press conference held after Ramirez's identity was uncovered, Los Angeles County Sheriff Sherman Block gave a message intended just for Ramirez himself. You cannot escape. Every law officer and every citizen now knows exactly what you look like and who you are. And true to Sheriff Block's words, Ramirez did not escape. He was captured on the 31st of August 1985 after trying to flee when he saw his face on every newspaper in every store. Ramirez was chased and beaten by the public, who formed a mob. Someone even hit him on the head with a metal pole. Finally, the police arrived and the Night Stalker, bloody and beaten, was escorted away by police to remain locked up for the rest of his life. Just like the crimes he committed, the trial of Richard Ramirez was all over the news. It was also the most expensive trial in California's history until the trial of O.J. Simpson. Ramirez, who loved the attention the media gave him, walked into his first trial yelling, "Hail Satan," with a pentagram drawn on his hand. In the many interviews he gave during the trial process, he mentioned Satanism frequently. In 1989, Ramirez was found guilty of 13 counts of murder, 5 counts of attempted murder, 11 counts of sexual assault, and 14 counts of burglary. He was sentenced to death in the gas chamber, to which he replied, "Big deal. Death always went with the territory. See you in Disneyland." He also told the court, "You don't understand me. You're not expected to. You're not capable. I'm beyond your experience. I am beyond good and evil. I will be avenged." Despite being a convicted murderer awaiting execution on death row, Ramirez received a lot of positive attention, especially from women. He would get both letters and visits from those who supported what he had done, and even married a woman named Doreen Leoy in 1996. Leoy originally said that she would die by suicide when Ramirez was executed. However, she left him in 2009 after finding out that he brutally murdered a child, Mei Leung. Ramirez then found another partner, a woman named Christine Lee. In the end, despite serving 23 years in prison, Ramirez was never executed. Natural causes beat his executioner to the punch, and he died of terminal cancer in 2013. Dr. Scott Bonn believes it was very unlikely that Ramirez showed any remorse for the suffering he'd inflicted when he was on death's doorstep, saying that Ramirez was a cruel and unrepentant psychopath, so it's very unlikely that he found Jesus before he died. What are your thoughts about the terrifying crimes of the Night Stalker? Is there anything important that we missed out in this video? If so, let us know in the comments below. If you liked this video and want to see more that are just as interesting, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.